U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra had some advice for Canada about the pause in trade talks between the two nations. Last month, President Donald Trump halted talks over an Ontario anti-tariffs ad, and the ambassador continued to lash out against the ad this week.
I've got suggestions that I think can get it restarted, but it's not going to be easy. And if Canada wants to insert itself and create a new precedent that you're going to participate in our electoral politics through advertising targeting the President of the United States and his policies, I would suggest that you seriously consider whether that is the best way to try to achieve your objectives in the United States of America.
Okay, to talk more about next steps, I'm joined by the Republican Senator from North Dakota, Kevin Cramer, who joins me now. Senator Cramer, it's good to have you here today. Thank you for your time, sir.
It's good to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity.
It's been almost a month since the president called off trade talks. What are your thoughts on what could get this restarted? Because it's creating a lot of economic damage on both sides of the border.
Well, it certainly is, David. And first of all, I agree with Ambassador Hoekstra. I think he's got good counsel for Canada. I would remind my friends in the United States, however, that this was the decision made by one premier, and I know Doug Ford pretty well, better than I know Pete Hoekstra, to be honest. And I think you got to be somewhat fair to the country in recognizing that fact. If it was a stunt, it probably worked well politically for Doug, but probably not so well for the whole country. That said, I'm optimistic like Pete is, and I'm optimistic because I do talk to both Canadian business people and U.S. business people. And the first piece of evidence I put forward, or as testimony, is that this week's announcement by Secretary Noem with Ambassador Hillman about the icebreaker deal, I think was a very good symbolic step. It's not an insignificant economic step either, but I do sense that it does show a thawing, if you will, of things, and I think it shows the potential for lots more.
Well, I find it difficult to share your optimism. I'm not saying you're wrong, Senator, but when you look at this, I mean, I don't think Mark Carney would have cut off talks if a governor, did something like that upset him, like would be the comparison to what Doug Ford did. And the other thing the Ambassador Hoekstra said was Canada needs to try to get itself into the lowest tariff bucket, which is where the 10% tariff rate, which is where the United Kingdom is. We have the North American Free Trade Agreement, or CUSMA, or USMCA, whatever you want to call it. I mean, why should Canada accept the 10% baseline after decades of increasing economic integration and free trade?
Well, I think a couple of reasons, if I might, and again, this is up to Canada, obviously, but in this particular arrangement or this particular relationship, we are coming up on the mandatory, obviously, review of USMCA, and the bigger of the two trading partners is wanting some different concessions. He's wanting to level the playing field further. I think he feels like there have been a number of nuisance non-tariff barriers that Canada has put up in various places, not the least of which, of course, is dairy. And I just think that the reality on the ground is that's at least a good incremental step. If Canada could get to the lowest, the baseline, if you will, of 10%, that would be tremendous progress for them, and I think it'd go a long ways in their negotiating with the president.
But I look, Senator, at some of the comments made by Howard Lutnick, for example, at a recent Canada-U.S. event in Toronto, where he basically said, you're not going to be making cars anymore for exporting to the U.S. market, that they seem intent as an administration on just nationalizing the Canadian auto sector and stripping our economy for parts in key parts of southern Ontario. I mean, I appreciate the dairy frustrations, but those are things to resolve in negotiation, right? This other stuff is devastating a core industry for your closest partner.
Well, I sometimes wonder if, quite honestly, I sometimes wonder if Secretary Lutnick understands how interdependent we are as two nations Granted, Canada's 40 million, we're 300 million more than that, and our economy is much, much bigger. However, the supply chains, the interconnection of our supply chains are good for both of us. And I sometimes wonder if he understands that, or for that matter, if he's just speaking bombastically as a negotiating tool to help Jamieson Greer. I don't know for sure, but so I share that frustration. For me, as a Northern Border senator, I don't really see destroying Canada's economy as being good for the United States. And one only needs to look at the tourism numbers to understand that if we took all industry away from Canada, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot in lots of ways. But it's much more complex than that. Canada's a very dear friend and a longtime friend, and we're going to survive this. David, we're going to get on the other side of it. I really do think that this week's announcement with the icebreakers was a beginning or a good first step toward finding ways to do exactly that. And I do believe that things are going to go better, much faster than some people might think.
Well, we may well get beyond it, Senator, but probably the relationship will be fundamentally and maybe permanently changed, right? You look at the decision that the government is weighing right now on the F-35s, for example. There is a real desire to not be as reliant on your country for national security issues and certainly on defense procurement. And the Swedes were here with the royal family and members of the government and Saab putting a pretty big offer on the table of up to 10,000 jobs. And a fighter jet within 3 years. I mean, why should Canada not look at that seriously?
Well, Canada should look at all options seriously. I think Canada has recognized the fact that maybe they've made themselves a little too dependent on their neighbor. At the same time, Canada enjoys a great deal of prosperity and security as a result of being a neighbor to the United States of America. And so I don't think that goes away in in a matter of a year or two. I think we've been through bumpy times before. We'll get through this one as well. But Canada does have to consider other options. They just may not be as convenient as your next door neighbor. At the same time, remembering that American security depends largely on securing the Arctic, and that's got to be a cooperative job between our two countries, and we can do better both from a national security standpoint, just in terms of systems and personnel, but also with our industrial base, which everybody knows that the United States has had a hard time getting our industrial base back up from the atrophy of taking 40 years off, in essence, and Canada can be an important player in helping us both build up our industrial base as well as build a strong industrial base in Canada.
No, I think Canadians would love to see the industrial base on both sides of the border be strong. It's just ours is the one that's under threat, certainly in the auto sector. But I wonder, how do you think the president, how do you think the administration would react if Canada does go another way on the F-35s? Because 88 fighter jets for Lockheed Martin is billions of dollars. It's a big contract, and it would be a shift away from the interoperability and integration with the United States.
Well, I don't know, David. I wouldn't want to anticipate how the United States will respond to that or would respond to that, but I can imagine a couple of ways they could. One is they could be very irritated by it and retaliate, or they could say, wait a minute, let's talk about this. We'd like you to buy those 88 jets from Lockheed here in the United States of America, and we ought to be working on other weapons systems together. But again, I'm not in the negotiations. Others are, but I think clearly we need to do things that are beneficial mutually, not just for one country or the other, or one country over the other.
Well, as Canada weighs what they're going to do with the fighter jets, there's still the ongoing conversation about the Golden Dome and whatever sort of concept that you land on there in terms of continental defense in that process. What can you tell us about the current state of those talks, Senator? Do you have any insight there you can share?
It's interesting you ask that, because I have been inquiring a lot over just the last week on Canada's role in Golden Dome, future role in Golden Dome. I've talked to people in the Pentagon about that, including General Gutlein, who is the direct report manager on Golden Dome in the United States. Canada is very, very important in it, and all talks are ongoing. I'm not going to reveal anything that I might or might not know, but we really, in my view, the United States needs Canada, Canada needs the United States, and Golden Dome is probably as good an example as any system that would intercept missiles coming over the Arctic obviously is important to both countries.
So just to circle back to where we sort of began, Senator, and to come back to your optimism about maybe things could get moving again on the trade negotiations. J.D. Vance, the Vice President, made a social media post today criticizing Canada's immigration policies for embracing diversity and it lowering our standard of living and sort of wading into, I'd say, culture war politics with Canada while we're also dealing with these trade issues. How do you move past that? Like, what is it you think needs to happen, like concretely, for your optimism to be realized?
Well, first of all, specifically to Vice President Vance's posting, and I didn't see it, but I'll take your word for it. He probably has a point in that if we're going to have this very long, rather porous, on-purpose border, and certainly a friendly one where I'd like to see flow back and forth much easier than it is right now, even both directions, by the way, it'll only be as good as the country that has the not the strongest, but the weakest of immigration policies as it relates to who is let in. I'm not talking about diversity in the sense of where they come from or
right.
What color their skin is, but rather how strict are the rules regarding who gets into the country. Obviously, this is an area where the long, friendly border can become a detriment to the one nation that's putting up the yield sign, if you will. So he's probably got a point. I don't know that I certainly wouldn't have probably put it that way, but I think he's got a relevant policy point, and I suspect again that's part of the negotiation that's going on in the broader discussion.
Right. No, it was more broadly about a high percentage of foreign-born population lowering our standard of living. So it's a bit more new. Like I'd take your point if it was about border controls and all these sorts of things and security, but you haven't seen it, so I'm not going to hold you to those words. But just I get you, Senator. But just on that final point, like what do you think needs to happen, like to get Mark Carney and Donald Trump speaking again about trade and get Ambassador Hillman and Trade Representative Greer back at the table?
Well, they need to pick up the phone. I'm pretty confident that your Ambassador Hillman is a regular, obviously lives just down the road from the United States Capitol. We get to see her a lot and talk to her a lot. Jamieson Greer and her have a good relationship. They want to be talking. I actually think that the president would welcome another visit from Mark Carney. Now, I haven't talked to him about that, either your prime minister or our president, but I think you asked the question, I think answers itself. How can we get those two guys talking again? And my answer is we need to get those two guys talking again. And one thing about Donald Trump is he's an easy guy to talk to. He's quite accessible, and I would certainly be advocating on our side of the border for that kind of a conversation to get going again.
Well, Republican Senator Kevin Cramer, thank you for being such an easy guy to talk to and joining us tonight. Enjoy Halifax. It's one of my favorite cities, sir. Thank you for being here.
It is a beautiful place. Thank you.